Somewhere in the back catalog of late 90s science fiction, there is a film in which the lead character speaks 104 words across nearly 2 hours of screen time, and spends 85% of those 2 hours actually on screen, not off screen, not in voiceover, present, watching, reacting, carrying scenes entirely through what his face does and what his body does, and what the air around him does when he enters a room. That film is Soldier from 1998, and that character is Sergeant Todd 3465, played by Kurt Russell. Before you start doing the maths, yes, 104 words is as few as it sounds, and before you assume the film is therefore cold, or empty, or unengaging, consider what it does with the time those words would normally occupy. The film opens by showing you who Todd is before it shows you what he can do, and the way it does this is not through dialogue, not through a friend he explains himself to, not through a voiceover that fills you in on his backstory. It shows you through time. From the moment Todd is chosen as an infant from a pool of other infants, the film tracks him through childhood drilling, adolescent campaigns, and then his adult service records scrolling upward on screen in plain text, battle after battle, a list of wars won, enemies neutralized, decades consumed. All of that arrives before Todd says a single word, which means that by the time he does speak, you already understand that conversation was never part of the design. Other films in the late 80s and 90s action science fiction world that Soldier sits near but never quite belongs to, those films establish their heroes through quips, through dangerous wisecracks, through an attitude that arrives before the character does. Arnold Schwarzenegger built an entire career on that contract with the audience. Sylvester Stallone built another. Even Russell himself, as Snake Plissken in Escape from New York, is essentially a walking disposition, defined as much by how he says things as by what he actually does. Todd refuses that entirely. His identity lives in what he does not say, in the space that banter would fill in any other film and simply does not fill here. And that absence is not a flaw in the script or a limitation of the performance, it is the film's actual subject. What the program took from Todd when it selected him as an infant was not just family, not just freedom, not just childhood. It stripped out the ordinary human process of discovering that you have preferences, that certain things matter to you more than others, that your interior life is something worth communicating to another person. An interior life would have been a liability in the field. The program needed soldiers, not people, and it got what it constructed. When the program no longer needed what it had constructed, it behaved exactly the way institutions behave toward what they no longer need. It threw him away. Running underneath every frame of Soldier, never once stated out loud, is a single idea. You are what you were made for, until you are not. Todd's engineering was not genetic. Not in the Blade Runner sense. It was social, psychological, and total, taken before he could form attachments, before he could develop preferences, before he could learn that some things carry more weight than others. Over 40 years of active service, he became the best soldier the program produced, precise, tireless, unbreakable, and then a newer model arrived, Kane 607, genetically augmented, physically superior, and unburdened by the hesitation that experience sometimes plants in a soldier's decision-making. Kane defeats Todd in a controlled test. Todd is declared obsolete. His body gets loaded onto a waste transport and offloaded on Arcadia 234, a planet whose entire function is to receive garbage. Sit with that image for a moment. The best soldier the program ever produced, the man who won every campaign his commanders assigned him, who served for 4 decades without complaint or desertion or doubt, dropped on a rubbish planet because the numbers said he was finished, not executed, not honored with a discharge, not even formally retired, disposed of, because the people who built him had already moved on to the next version. And this is where the film gets genuinely interesting, even though it never announces itself, never pauses to underline what it is doing. Todd lands on a planet that is already populated by people who were discarded. Colonists whose ship crashed years ago, whom nobody came to rescue, who built a modest life out of whatever the waste transports deposited around them. Every single person on Arcadia 234 is there because the system forgot they existed. That is not coincidence. That is the film's thesis, stated in Geography. Most viewers remember Soldier as a lean, hard-edged action film with unusual fight choreography and a famously quiet lead performance. That reading is fair. But near the middle of the film there is one scene roughly 3 minutes long, almost entirely wordless, that qualifies as one of the more emotionally precise moments in 90s science fiction, and most people who have seen the film still gloss over what actually happens in it. Todd has been taken in by the colonists under protest. He sleeps in their barn. He eats when food appears. He does not attempt conversation, because no social vocabulary was ever installed in him. Sandra, who took pity on him and argued for letting him stay, has a young son named Nathan, who has not spoken since the crash that stranded the colony here. One morning, a highly venomous snake gets within reach of Nathan. Todd moves fast and without hesitation, grabs the snake, and kills it in front of the boy, methodically and thoroughly, the way he was trained to neutralize a threat. Then he walks away. Sandra watches from a distance and concludes that Todd is dangerous, unstable, a threat to her child. The colonists hold a meeting and vote to expel him, and Todd accepts the verdict without argument, walking back out alone into the debris fields. What Sandra missed, and what the film trusts you to eventually figure out without explanation, is that Todd was not threatening Nathan. He was teaching him. He had identified the danger, dealt with it, and then demonstrated to the boy exactly what to do the next time it happened. Kill the threat, survive. That was the only curriculum Todd ever received, and he was trying to pass it on in the only instructional language available to him. He gets expelled for a lesson nobody could read. The film lets Sandra discover the truth later, secondhand. When Nathan uses the exact same technique to save his parents from another snake, and the moment she understands, she runs out into the waste fields to find Todd and bring him back. That scene, Sandra running, her expression shifting from fear into something that is not quite gratitude and not quite apology but carries both, arrives with more force than almost any line of dialogue in the film, because by that point you understand that Todd has been trying to communicate the entire time. He just has no language for anything except survival. David Peoples had the script for Soldier sitting in a drawer since 1984. That 14-year gap matters, because the film it most closely resembles was still relatively fresh in 1984, Shane, the 1953 Western, in which a drifting gunfighter arrives at a homestead, cannot fit into the peaceful life of the family who shelters him, and cannot walk away from their danger. The structural blueprint maps almost exactly onto Soldier. An outsider arrives wounded. A family takes him in reluctantly. The wider community distrusts him. He defends the people who sheltered him. He leaves, or tries to. Shane is a film about the incompatibility between violence and ordinary life, about the fact that the skill set that makes someone useful in a crisis is precisely what makes them impossible to absorb once the crisis passes. Todd is that same figure, placed in a future where the gunfighter was not born into his violence but assembled for it, and then declared surplus by the institution that did the assembling. What Peoples grasped, and what the film carries without spelling out, is that the Western was never really about the American frontier. It was always about what a society does with the men it needs for dangerous work, and then has no place for once the danger is managed. The frontier soldiers who could not find footing in settled America. The factory workers whose skills became redundant overnight. The specialists in every field who discovered that the thing that made them valuable in one context made them strange in every other. Soldier puts that story into space, but the story itself is much older and much closer to home. The colonists of Arcadia 234 carry the same story from a different angle. Their ship crashed, nobody came to find them, and at some point the absence of rescue stops being a delay and becomes abandonment. And then abandonment becomes the shape of an entire life. Two kinds of forgotten people find each other on a waste planet at the edge of charted space, the system's finest soldier and the system's overlooked survivors, both made entirely of what the system decided it no longer wanted. The question the film is quietly asking, underneath its action surface, is whether what gets thrown away is ever actually worthless, or whether the system that discarded it was simply wrong about the calculation. The answer it gives is not complicated, but it takes the full length of the film to earn. Colonel Meckham deserves more attention than he usually gets, because he is the film's second most precisely drawn character, and he is drawn almost entirely in negative space. Jason Isaacs plays Meckham as a man who has never had to be good at anything physically dangerous, a bureaucrat with formal authority over warriors, which is a very specific position and a very specific kind of problem. He dismisses Todd's 4-decade service record without deliberation. What interests him is the program he represents, the newer model, the thing that justifies his own continued importance. Kane 607 is not just a superior soldier to Meckham. Kane 607 is Meckham's argument for his own relevance. Underneath the Todd story, running quietly parallel to it, the film is making a second point: not everyone who gets to decide who is obsolete has earned the standing to decide. Meckham holds power by rank rather than by accomplishment. The institution gave him authority over men whose competence he has no framework for evaluating, because he never developed one. He reads numbers, service records, and controlled test results. He watches Todd lose a straight physical contest to a younger, augmented opponent and concludes that Todd is therefore finished. The reduction is total and immediate. Gary Busey's Captain Church is the film's quiet rebuttal. Church is also a military man, also inside the system, also bound by hierarchy, but he has been around long enough to understand what the numbers cannot measure. He objects to Meckham's decisions carefully, within the limits of what his rank allows him to object to. He advocates for the veterans when Meckham wants to abandon them, and when Meckham issues an order that Church genuinely cannot comply with, Church refuses and pays for it with his life. Not a hero in any grand sense, just a man who maintained enough contact with reality to recognize what was happening even when he could not prevent it. Meckham ends up on the garbage planet too. Eventually, not as a castaway but as a combatant, and he discovers in the most direct way possible the difference between directing soldiers from a comfortable room and actually occupying the terrain they are fighting over. The film does not savor this. It simply shows it. Competence reasserts itself when the abstraction collapses. Meckham had none to fall back on. Peoples also wrote Blade Runner and Unforgiven, and that is not a detail that floats past without meaning. His recurring subject across all three films is what systems extract from people, and what gets left behind when the extraction is complete. Roy Batty's final speech in The Rain is a people's creation. William Money's slow, costly violence in Unforgiven is a people's creation. Todd built entirely in service of an institution, discarded by it, and then confronted with the question of who he is without it, belongs to the same lineage. Paul Anderson made a visual choice that rarely gets acknowledged. He shot the military sequences with cold symmetry. Geometric framing, blue and green tones, everything arranged and orderly. When the film moves to Arcadia 234, the palette shifts completely. Warm sepia, asymmetrical compositions, organic shapes half buried in wreckage. Anderson said he wanted the garbage planet to feel like an old photograph, like something from a different era. The military world reads as a machine. The garbage planet reads as the past. Todd moves from one into the other, and the film's color tells you what that transition means before Todd can find words for it. Which is fortunate, because he never does. The action finale is the least interesting stretch of Soldier, which is a deliberate structural choice. Todd uses terrain knowledge and hard experience against soldiers who are physically superior but tactically raw, and experience carries the day, not because the film is offering comfort, but because Todd never stopped learning even after the institution stopped believing in him. And 40 years of real campaigns against a new model's theoretical advantages is a specific and honest kind of argument. During the first week of shooting, Russell broke his left ankle. 4 days after returning, he broke the top of his right foot. The entire production had to restructure around the injuries, shooting scenes where Russell was horizontal first, then sitting, then standing still, then finally moving. The running sequence near the film's opening was the very last thing filmed. All of that, while speaking 104 words, 20 of those words are the words "sir." The remaining 84 words carry a man's complete interior life: grief when his fellow soldiers die, confusion when he encounters a child who does not speak, rage when Kane 607 defeats him, and the slow, inarticulate sense of belonging that arrives when the colonists take him back despite everything. Russell does something specific here that is hard to name and easy to feel. He does not play Todd as an emotionless machine. He plays a man who has emotions and no delivery system for them, no vocabulary, no social gesture, no ritual through which what he feels can travel from him to another person. When Todd cries, once, quietly, alone in the barn, it reads less like a breakdown than a pressure leak, something escaping that was never designed to have an outlet. He does not know what to do with it any more than the colonists know what to do with him. And the film is wise enough not to resolve that strangeness. The Blade Runner thread runs through this chapter too. Todd's service record lists campaigns at the shoulder of Orion and Tannhäuser Gate, the same locations Roy Batty names in his dying speech in Blade Runner, his elegy for the life he was not permitted to complete. Different kind of soldier, same universe, same disposable relationship with the institution that built him. The things that institution installed in Todd do not vanish when the institution discards him. They are still there, still operating, still him. And the question of what he does with them when there is no mission and no formally designated enemy, that is where the human being has to begin, if there is one left to locate. Todd finds one, barely, in a boy who also does not speak, on a planet nobody visits on purpose, among people who were themselves thrown away. Arcadia 234 is easy to read as a generic hostile environment backdrop, and most reviews of Soldier treat it that way. Look more carefully, and the setting is doing something quite specific. This is not an alien world, no indigenous species, no strange ecosystem, no dangers that evolved there. It is a managed waste disposal site for a civilization that has expanded far enough to need somewhere to put what it no longer wants, and what it no longer wants has been accumulating there for a long time. The production design team seeded the debris fields with recognizable wreckage: the USS Franklin Delano Roosevelt, an F-117X from another film entirely, a spinner from Blade Runner, a section of the Lewis and Clark from Event Horizon. Film fans will catch the references, but the references are also an argument embedded in the set dressing. Even the iconic things end up here eventually, even the objects that felt permanent and important when they were new. The colonists built their settlement inside that wreckage, which means they are living inside the discarded past of the culture that forgot them, and they have made something habitable out of it. Not comfortable, not aspirational, but real, and theirs, and worth the trouble of defending. Meckham selects Arcadia 234 as a training ground precisely because it is worthless. Nobody will object to what happens there, and the people who have built their lives there have always known that the system views them the same way it views the junk they live among. Todd, recently added to that category himself, takes a different position. Not in any speech, in the way he maps the terrain, identifies the positions, uses every rusted strut and collapsed hull and unmapped gradient that nobody bothered to chart because nobody thought the place mattered. He turns the garbage planet into a fortress and defends it with everything he has, because it is the first location that has ever contained something he wants to stay near. Peoples never intended Soldier as a Blade Runner sequel, or even a companion piece. He wrote it as a separate story with its own architecture and its own concerns, in what he considered a separate universe. And yet the threads are there, woven in, not as fan service, but as a kind of thematic echo that Peoples clearly could not avoid. Todd's service record, visible on a computer screen near the film's opening, includes the Battle of Tannhäuser Gate and campaigns at the shoulder of Orion. Any Blade Runner viewer will feel something shift in their chest when those words appear, before they consciously identify why. Those are the places Roy Batty names as he sits dying in the rain, his account of what he has witnessed and what he is losing the right to remember. In Blade Runner, those words arrive as elegy, spoken by a being built for violence who discovered along the way that he did not want to die. In Soldier, they are just line items in a personnel file. Campaign survived, targets eliminated, steps along a road that terminates at a garbage planet. What Peoples kept returning to across both scripts is that the Blade Runner world is not fundamentally a story about artificial beings. It is a story about what gets created, used and discarded, and about whether the thing being discarded has any standing to object. Roy Batty, Rachel, Pris, built to perform specific functions, scheduled for termination once those functions expire. Their tragedy is not that they are synthetic. It is that they were given enough of a self to understand their own disposability and suffer that understanding. Todd was not given enough of a self to fully comprehend what was done to him. Roy Batty could articulate his grief, could reach for language equal to the scale of what he was losing. Todd can barely articulate hunger. The erasure is more complete, the damage running deeper precisely because it was more thorough, and he cannot even mourn what he never knew he was supposed to have. He carries it instead, the weight of the person he might have been pressing on every interaction, every near connection, every moment where another human being extends something toward him and he has no mechanism for receiving it. Peoples came back to the same question from a different angle. What does a society owe to the things it creates? What does it mean when the answer, arrived at without hesitation, is nothing? The thing that will catch you off guard about Soldier, if you go in expecting a standard late 90s action film, is how quiet it is. How much a film can carry in a held gaze, a hand extended and then withdrawn, a man sitting in a barn in the dark while something he has never been allowed to feel finds a way out anyway. Russell understood something about Todd that the marketing department never managed to communicate. The story was never about a soldier reclaiming his combat effectiveness. It was about a man reclaiming the right to matter to someone. Soldier opened in 1998 and vanished almost immediately. Critics called it thin. Audiences were already somewhere louder and faster, and the film made back a fraction of what it cost. That might have been the end of it. Films with a real idea underneath their surface tend to find the people who need them, though, and Soldier found those people slowly, over years, through cable television and late-night rentals, and the kind of recommendation that travels without the help of algorithms. People who saw it at 14 and retained Todd's face in the barn scene without being able to explain exactly why. People who rewatched it at 35, after a company restructure, or a career that an institution decided was no longer worth maintaining, and discovered that the film had things to say to them now that they had not been in a position to hear the first time. That is what a film with something real in it does. Not win everyone. Find the ones for whom it was always going to land differently. Put it on tonight. Watch the barn scene. Watch what happens when Nathan finds Todd after the snake. Watch Sandra running out into the waste fields. And think about what that run means to a man who was specifically designed to mean nothing to anyone. The film speaks 104 words. And most of what it has to say it never says at all. What do you think it would take to rebuild a self that was never really built in the first place? Leave it in the comments. We read all of them.